So welcome to Innovations in Agriculture, the show where we talk about new innovations, new ways, new things coming down the pike, new technologies, new methods of doing things, etc. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about soil health and microbial activity. Um, I think microbes have been around for quite a while. They're not necessarily a brand new thing. In fact, I think they've been around. I mean, microbes obviously been around millions of years, but in terms of microbes or microbial biostimulants as a crop additive or as a soil additive is a relatively new thing that's been around for maybe the last 10, 15 years. And what I kind of noticed, I was talking to some microbial vendors in the last couple of weeks, and it kind of made me, it interested me a lot. It interested me because number one, they were getting really good results on most of their installations. I mean, they were producing, I wouldn't say exactly similar results to ours. I mean, they would say between 5% and maybe 25% increases in yield. So in many cases, on things like hay and grass and these types of things, um, their systems would really improve. And I say that it's not necessarily where we're at because in our case, we're usually hitting between 15 and 30% on a consistent average, and sometimes all the way up to 100%, 200% increases in yield. But our technology is designed to enhance microbial function in the soil, so it makes a very symbiotic relationship with microbial vendors, because obviously if microbial vendors are trying to help farmers put those microbes back in the soil that have been damaged or that have been killed or made dormant because of over fertilization and over chemical use, etc. These types of vendors are helping farmers put that back in the soil, and it's becoming more and more common and more understood how soil health works and how microbial function in the soil works. Um, and really, if you look at the natural aspect, when you look at sort of innovations in agriculture, there's really two kinds of camps. One is a way to take us back toward nature and a more natural approach with using less chemicals, less chemical fertilizers, less inputs, those types of things, and maybe less mechanistic sort of tools like no-till and those types of things. And then there's the other types of innovations which are looking to take what's being currently done and just extend it and make those things more efficient. So the Cuminasi plant booster is kind of like a hybrid in those, and that's why I think when we get confused with a lot of people, some people think it's equipment like a tractor or something like that, and some people think it's more like an input like a microbial or like a bugs in a jug type of thing. In fact, we get farmers asking us how much is it for a jug of your stuff, and I want to just be able to pour water in the jug and say it's $20 per gallon or something like that, but it doesn't work quite that way. Um, what our system is doing with quantum physics is we're essentially improving microbial function in soil because we're sort of vibrating. We have vibrations or frequency patterns that are designed to mimic the natural oscillations of those single cell organisms like bacteria, fungi, spores, even viruses, those types of things, beneficial nematodes. These types of single-celled organisms, protozoa, these types of single-celled organisms are what are sort of nature's way of taking atmospheric nitrogen and pulling it down and reconverting it to a form that plants can use, right? That's one of the main functions. It can also take minerals such as mineral calcium, mineral potassium, mineral phosphorus, and convert them into phosphates, which again can be used directly by the plants. And they're also responsible for what we call denitrification. So there's nitrification, pulling nitrogen into the soil, and there's denitrification, which is if the soil is too rich in nitrogen, there's microbes that actually reduce the amount of nitrogen so that it doesn't evaporate back out into the air. Well, when you're adding a lot of nitrogen fertilizer, we're adding a ton of tons and tons of nitrogen to the soil. The plants can't absorb all of that nitrogen, and it's part of the microbial function in the soil to denitrify it. In other words, to take that nitrogen out in a way that's not going to bleed into the waterways or go evaporate back into the air. But because chemical nitrogen and chemical pesticides have a tendency to reduce microbial function or reduce their effectiveness, then that denitrification part of the process is removed, and then a lot of that stuff goes into our waterways, a lot of that stuff goes into our air, and that becomes an environmental hazard. In fact, here in Florida, where our office is based, we have problems where we get this red tide. And what red tide is, it's an algae bloom. It's an algae that's in the water. because of the excess nitrogen, those algae use that nitrogen as food. They basically over multiply in a given waterway, like a lake or river, or sometimes in a delta, around the ocean. And then and then when those algae run out of food, they all die. Well, because they've expanded far beyond what the environment can normally handle, that actually creates a toxic effect. It creates toxins that can make humans sick, and it can kill fish and other wildlife. So it actually creates an environmental problem by having too much nitrogen that leaches into the waterways and gets into our environment. And the other side of it is nitric oxide and other nitrogen-based compounds, which are found in fertilizers. When it leaches back, when it evaporates back out in the environment or the atmosphere, it doesn't evaporate out as N2 molecules or just plain nitrogen. It's nitric oxide and and other nitrogen-based compounds. These compounds are actually responsible for greenhouse gases that are 200 times more powerful in terms of global warming than carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide. So while everybody's banging the drum for more fuel-efficient cars, we have, unfortunately, farming practices that are doing a lot worse damage. And of course, farmers don't want to do that. They're just trying to make a living. We're trying to help them by reducing their need for nitrogen so they don't have to add as much and create less of an environmental impact. But microbes in the soil can really only um, thrive in a certain type of soil environment. And I want to kind of walk you through, not an entire presentation, but I just want to walk you through this concept. It's very interesting to note, and this is something I learned when I was talking to a soil scientist not that long ago. Let me open this up here. When I was talking to a soil scientist, he mentioned this key fact, and he pointed me out to a couple of websites. One of them was basically this idea that in certain types of soil types, especially high sodium soils, microbes do not thrive. Microbes actually get into this. Sorry. Microbes do not thrive in soils with high electrical conductivity or high sodium concentrations. And the interesting thing is most chemical-based fertilizers, they require a high EC or high sodium concentration. That's how some of these fertilizers are able to dissolve into the soil. So let me just take 1 second here. Guys, if you have questions while I'm pulling this up, please ask your questions. I'll be sure to answer them for you. I definitely want to make sure that your questions are answered. So, but it's taking me a little while. I should have this prepared, because that's what I get for not being prepared. Okay, here we go. Let me share my screen here so you can see it. That would be a good thing. But yeah, microbial function actually suffers in terms of soils that are high in electrical conductivity and high sodium concentrations. And I want to just kind of show you this here. I can get this. There we go. So this is based upon CropWatch. It's a university published study that was done years ago. And it says basically that as EC or electrical conductivity increases, soil microorganism activity decreases, affecting respiration, residue decomposition, that's that nitrification and other residues, nitrification and denitrification. So electrical conductivity is the measurement of the positively charged ions, especially sodium, in the soil. So if you have a high EC or high electrical conductivity, that means your sodium concentration is high. And the problem with high sodium concentrations is, number one, it can create a toxic effects for the plants, but number two, it actually causes microbial activity to decrease. Now, when you have arid, sandy type soils, EC will tend to be really high. It'll tend to be higher, and the organic matter will be low, and that creates a difficult, challenging growing operation for most crops. However, what happens when you add chemical nitrogen and pesticides and other common inputs in agriculture is those types of chemicals require excess sodium or higher ECs in order to dissolve into the soil so the plants can use them. So they actually have compounds that increase the EC, electrical conductivity, and that by itself will reduce microbial activity. So sometimes it's not just that we're over nitrifying or putting too much nitrogen or putting too much phosphorus or potassium. We're actually putting EC in there, which is reducing microbial function in the soil. And when we do that, of course, we reduce microbial activity, which further makes it more difficult for the soil to sequester nitrogen out of the atmosphere and convert it into usable form. So we're actually by bypassing nature and adding chemical fertilizers, we're actually reducing nature's effectiveness and making it even more difficult to have a good soil quality. The second thing is sodic soils or high sodium concentration soils have poor soil structure and poor infiltration or drainage, as well as increased toxicity. So I already mentioned that with plants, if you have too much salt or too much sodium, it will create a toxic effect to the plant and they will start to suffer. But it also reduces the soil structure, so it can actually create a problem where minerals and chemicals and things do not infiltrate down into the soil. So water will not infiltrate down into the soil very well. It will also have bad drainage. So water that gets into the soil will stay there and it can create problems with root rot and other problems. And then the last thing here is EC indirectly indicates the amount of water and water soluble nutrients available for uptake. So um, if you have high ECs or high sodium concentration, it can actually affect the water retention in the soil. Now, when we mentioned in our in our other presentations that our system can increase water retention and can reduce EC, it can help improve soil structure. A lot of times people say, well, how does a simple signal do that? Well, the reason we're able to do that is because we're able to increase microbial activity. Microbial activity and earthworm activity in the soil and other wildlife and other organisms in the soil are nature's way to maintain that balance in the soil. And they maintain a good balance between electrical conductivity and other nutrients and nitrogen and other types of essential nutrients for the plants. And if that balance is correct, you're going to have a soil that's going to be very effective and very fertile. And it will stay fertile and be sustainable for years to come. However, if you upset that balance by too much, you start to get a dwindling spiral where the soil gets worse and worse and worse. So our system, by enhancing microbial activity in the soil, is able to make the soil more efficient and more fertile for years to come. And because farmers are recognizing that our system makes the plant itself more efficient at utilizing those nutrients and those resources, they can realize that they can reduce the amount of fertilizer they're using so they don't keep putting the problem and they don't keep adding to the problem. And one thing I tell farmers when they say, well, I'm looking at increasing by using microbes to improve my yield, I say, great, by all means add microbes. But if you're just using the same amount of fertilizer, you're just killing the microbes that you're putting on there and you're fighting yourself. You're just spending your money in two different places that are working against each other. So if you want a solution that's going to help you improve microbial activity, not only the microbial activity that's already there, but if you're going to add microbes and add that to your regimen, then it's going to make that addition that much more efficient. If you want a system that's going to make plants more efficient to utilize less fertilizer and get better yield and to improve overall soil health over time, then the Kiminasi plant booster is the innovation that handles all these things. And it handles it in a very, very simple way. All we have to do is make plants and soil healthy, and the rest will take care of itself. If you want more information about our system, feel free to email us at service@harvestharmonics.com. We would love to talk to you about your farm and your specific needs and work out a way that you can see this for yourself on your farm, because this is the new way that farming is going to be done for years to come. The benefits are so far outweighing the costs or any other considerations that you're really just wasting money if you're not using this. So give us a call or send us an email and let's work together to make your farm part of the future of farming today. That's it we got today, guys, and have a great day.